This is the second video responding to the tweet by Culture Critic. I'm going to start it off similar to the first in case you didn't watch the first one. To remind you, I don't know much about football, either one, but I'm talking about the America one. I understand the basic rules. I know what a touchdown is and the shape of the ball, and I even get the basic strategies of rushing versus passing, but I'm not a fan. As in, I watch the Super Bowl every other year or so and have fun, but I don't paint my face or know any of the players' names. Given that context about me, imagine if I set up a social media presence called Football Critic and posted a question with an image like this that said, "Dear footballers, what is preventing you from playing like this?" It would be a silly question that my football fan friends would rightfully be annoyed by and respond with ridicule. They would probably make fun of my ignorance, and I would have to leave the big screen for the big table full of food. And hopefully one of my fan friends who was the most gracious would make their way over to me during an ad break and help me understand the history of the sport, and why my question was so ignorant, and indeed that there were some good reasons why the pads are so big now, even though they certainly constrict a player's movement. Well, on July 9th, the Twitter account Culture Critic posted a photo of Paul Troger's 1733 painting on the ceiling of the Altenburg Abbey in Austria with the question, "Dear artists, what is preventing you from painting like this?" As I said, this is the second video where I'm going to respond to this question. The first video focused on the implicit condemnation underlying the question and meant to point out the ignorance of the question. The second video will address the blindness that most conservatives have as they look only at the art that frustrates them the most, instead of looking for art that they might actually like. I intend for this video to be more gracious, because the reality is that there are quite a few artists who are making work, like the work that Culture Critic highlighted, and some of them are actually pretty close to the mainstream. So I wonder if perhaps there's just an issue of not noticing that these artists exist, and not being able to mingle with them. So let's start off by trying to understand where Culture Critic is coming from. I have to first make some assumptions about why Culture Critic likes the Troger painting. I think there are several areas that are rightly appreciated. The first is the skill of the artist that is obvious by the presentation. The second is the feeling the work conveys. After all, this is a Last Judgment scene. But it feels far more positive and hopeful instead of classically foreboding. The third is the style of the painting, with its Baroque and Rococo influences and dramatic realism of the figures. And the final area is the theological and religious expression of the artwork. There are probably other aspects of the artwork that Culture Critic likes, but the nature of Twitter rewards short quips rather than in-depth critiques. I suppose that is why I'm choosing to make video essays instead of just short tweets. Maybe this is where I err and figure that whoever's behind this account would actually want the question answered in a reasonable manner. Shame on me, I suppose. Let's talk about the first three areas: skill, impact or effect on the audience, and the style. All are laudable areas. Most people throughout time would enjoy these aspects of this artwork. There will be a few art snobs like myself who might take issue with this style. For example, some folks don't like the Baroque and Rococo elements as they're too sensual and might cause sexual arousal. Jonathan Pageau might be one to critique it in this vein, as he has spoken critically of the Mannerists of the 16th century, specifically El Greco, and how religious artwork started depicting what Pageau calls angel upskirts. Troger's depiction skirts, pun intended, this category. It is not as sensual as some of the Mannerist works in particular, but it flirts with bare thighs enough that some of the more prudent might take offense. The fourth area, the religious nature of the work, is far more controversial to speak about. Many folks say good riddance as the influence of Judeo-Christian theology fades from Western culture. Others, like Culture Critic, bemoan this loss. Let's imagine Culture Critic really wanted an answer to the question, what is preventing painters from painting like this? After all, almost every human on this planet that has the gift of sight would say it is well done, powerfully impactful, and full of memorable drama. If we take that at face value, then we can start to formulate an answer by the true fact that the cultural significance of Christianity has faded. Therefore, Artists can't find much monetary success catering to that audience. This is a byproduct of the Protestant Reformation, by the way. But this cannot be the only reason why. Otherwise, we would see similar skills, impact, and styles, but with content of other theologies or philosophies. The truth is that we did for a while, up until around the 20th century, like I mentioned in the first video. Everything about our artistic sensibilities changed because of the actual history of the 20th century. Artists could not ignore the happenings of that century, just like a law office cannot ignore the development of the computer. If a law office decided it was not going to evolve and would rather maintain the practice of handwritten documents, it would only have survived in the 20th century if it found a large enough community with the same valuation of legal penmanship. I doubt any of these exist, but if they do, you will find them in self-sufficient, cloistered communities like the Amish or Mennonites. Which leads me to my first answer to the Culture Critic. There are still artists who paint like this. They are few and far between, and their work is not featured in the galleries of high art establishments, but they do exist. Artists like Paul Ingebretson and the gallery he works with, the Guild of Boston Artists, they keep the fire of this particular art tradition alive. There are many more like this all over the world, and they are a bit like the Amish and Mennonites. Google atelier or traditional painting like the master schools. You will most likely not find them at any college or universities, but you will find them around, especially on the East Coast in the US and throughout Europe. My second answer is that works like the Troger are being produced, but folks like Culture Critic don't have the eyes to see it. This is not necessarily a condemnation of Culture Critic, but I'm just being honest. I mean, in the way I talk about the football game earlier, I do not have the eyes to see everything that is going on, and I don't understand the nuances or history of the game. I can still enjoy the game when it's recognizable to me, but when a flag for holding is thrown after a great play, I tend to wonder, how can holding be a bad thing in a game where tackling is encouraged? Which just shows my blindness, my ignorance. In a similar manner, Culture Critic is critiquing a culture that is outside their area of understanding. At least, that is what it seems like to me. If someone had an understanding of art history, they would understand why the artworks being made today do not look like the Troger painting. Let me try to get at this in as brief a manner as possible, and please know, yet again, this is a whirlwind gloss. But let's think about the White City again. Neoclassicism, at its finest, paired with modern mechanized industry. The future is bright, so bright it inspires Walt Disney to start planning his magical kingdom and his world. They reversed the flow of the Chicago River, and the dynamo would change the world for the better. This style of triumphant artwork that shows how humans will become like gods is celebrated. What does this promise lead to? Around 40 years of the worst wars the world has ever seen. Millions of dead soldiers and civilians alike. The world wrestles with the promise they saw just a few decades earlier, all the way through the dropping of those 2 bombs in Japan. What happened to that promise? And what should artists do knowing that the future those visions presented was a lie? After all, Troger's vision of St. John's apocalyptic vision looks so nice compared to Hiroshima after the blast. I think the Japanese post-war artists, called the Gutai, are a great illustration of why artists chose not to paint like Troger during the 20th century, especially in the second half of it up until today. The Gutai were confronted with the reality of an emperor god who was deposed by American forces and forced to admit he was a mere man. The Japanese artists who had begun adopting Western realism suddenly faced the cultural dishonor that all Japan was wrestling with, and they began to seek a new way of experiencing the material that they traditionally made art with. This is a simplification, but you can find their manifesto linked in the description below. In short, they saw the reality of the arrogance of the imperial propaganda and actively decided to find a new aesthetic route forward. This turned into weird things like running through paper, painting with feet, and wrestling in mud. Jackson Pollock saw their work and started his action paintings in response. You can see, as I said in the first video, the artists are responding to culture and history, and they are presenting what they see more than they are making culture. In the post-war chaos, the cosmology of Troger did not ring true. Instead, the modernists, and later the postmodernists, find that the depictions of the human figure only show one side, the nice side, the side that might be related to heaven. But as Alexander Solzhenitsyn shows, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every human, and indeed there is an evil human. We saw the results of that spirit despite the promise of the White City. Or, and this is where much of the ugliness of the 20th century art comes from, perhaps the atrocities of the 20th century were the real fulfillment of the promise of the White City. Trust in those styles and skills were questioned because of what they led to. Folks of all disciplines, but especially the arts, began to question the authority of these humanistic images that use beauty to seduce us into the hubris of the 20th century. And so they turned to abstraction. They looked at the material they were working with. They wondered if simple shapes and forms and colors could satisfy the human appetite for artistic beauty and meaning. The Gutai, as well as other modernist movements, discovered a huge depth of aesthetic experience that worked on a completely different level. Instead of representing, that is, representing, the natural world, they began to shape the materials of the world into presentations that caused meaningful effects on the viewer, rather than symbolizing narrative meaning. Which leads me to how artists today are actually using the language of abstraction and minimalism to do similar things as Troger without the historic guilt that humanistic images are weighed down by after the events of the 20th century. These are the sky spaces of James Turrell. At the core, they are very simple. White ceilings with a hole in them, and a very thin edge between the ceiling and the sky above. It's minimalistic on the one hand. The materials are simple. It's not depicting the sky, it's merely framing it. Turrell explores what this frame can do with different settings, scales, and lighting effects. He found that he can actually change the color of the sky without actually changing the color of the sky. He plays with the way our eyes work and perceive light. My personal favorite of the sky spaces is in the Live Oak Friends Meeting House in Houston, Texas. It is a Quaker meeting house, which is to say it's their church. They are a unique denomination of Christianity, one that is influenced by the iconoclasm that is part of the Protestant Reformation. The most amazing effect of this pared-down presentation is what it does to the sky. Troger's work pushes the heavens above us, so much so that we forget the ceiling is even there. It is beautiful and is just out of reach. It makes us feel small. At its very essence, it is an illusion. This is not what the heavens look like. Remember, this is not a pipe. This is not the heavens. It is pigment and plaster on wood and stone. Turrell's sky space is not an illusion. It is the sky, and it enters the worship space. That is no illusion of the sky. It is a hole in the ceiling without any glass between it and the viewer. When you sit in the room and gaze up, the rectangle of the sky pops forward while the white border recedes from your vision. This is part of the physiology of how your eye and your brain work in order to interpret the visual world around you. Because of this, you get a feeling that the sky is in the room. And it actually is. After all air is part of the sky. The sense of communion and sacred space is like no other I've ever felt. Its simplicity and honesty makes no logical sense. Even if you explain the physiology of the eye and how the brain processes images, you still cannot help feeling the calming presence this artwork elicits in us. So how would I hope the Culture Critic receives this, especially based on the guesses I made about what aspects of Troger's work the critic appreciated? Turrell's work takes skill. Not just any contractor can build this sort of space. It's not the same sort of painterly skill as Troger, but it is a skill that has been developed over years of Turrell learning about light and architecture. It has a power that is similar to Troger in beauty and hope, but through abstraction and the honest presentation of the sky rather than the illusory depiction of the heavenly sky. It has a very different style, one that requires patience and study to understand, and perhaps that is a negative, depending on what you think the responsibility of the artist is. But I would have to say this, back to the football analogy. There are some rules and practices that are self-evident about football, and there are some that aren't. My fan friends assure me there is a logic there, and rather than condemning their pastime as illogical and opaque, I crack a beer and nod along with faith that they know the language better than I, and surely there is some reasonable explanation why a touchdown is worth 6 points, but I certainly can't find it. Which leaves me to the final area that the critic might have enjoyed. The religious cosmology Troger presents. Not all modern art denies God. Turrell's work certainly doesn't. He is a Quaker after all. Turrell's work humbly opens our eyes to actually look at a piece of those heavens. We can feel its presence in a far different way. It is here with us in our midst. I don't care if you're a Christian or a Muslim, a theist or an atheist. When you're in a Turrell sky space, you have to wonder, what on earth is happening? What are you sensing? How can such a simple form of architecture impact you so much? If Troger makes us forget the ceiling is there, Turrell doesn't have to. He reminds us that the heavens are always all around us, we just merely forget. To the culture that has denounced Judeo-Christian ideas, Troger's work is oppressive and pushes them away. I don't think Turrell's does that as much. It is certainly less didactic and open to interpretation. The Meeting House was finished in the year 2000. Name me a church designed since 2000 that has gotten art world elites to step inside its sanctuary and marvel at the art, or even take a pilgrimage to go see a space designed for a small religious community. So why aren't painters painting like this? Because we can't deny the history of the 20th century. Because the religious folk stopped supporting this. Because we found out that raw materials and abstract forms still hold meaning. Because art can do more than depict clouds and narratives. Like instrumental music without words, non-representational art can be an experience of something much deeper than a didactic diagram. Even a skillful and beautiful diagram of sorts, like Troger's. There are artists working like Troger, and there are artists that are doing something different for good reasons. I hope these two videos serve as an answer to a stupid question, just like my football friends answer me when I ask dumb questions during the game. First, they chastise me for my ignorance and defend the art of the game, then, if they are kind, they gracefully try to meet me where I'm at and explain what the heck is going on. I hope those two tones come through, and I hope the critic starts to get in the game of showing the gems of our culture, learning why things are the way they are, celebrating what is good, understanding what is odd, and then, humbly, offering a critique.